Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Emmy, for the introduction. I will talk a bit about myself in a moment, but I wanted to frame my discussion today. This whole idea of providing value in the process that's so rapidly changing thanks to AI. So I wanted to really frame the discussion. Basically, I will go into this metaphor I'm using about the last mile, where that comes from, and also the epiphanies I had about this metaphor. I quickly adopted this metaphor when planning my presentation, and I immediately began to shoot it down because there's a lot more than just the last mile involved. But before I jump in, quick show of hands. How many people left before 10 o'clock last night? Oh, Sufyan. That I don't believe. Before 11. Before 12. Wow, hardcore partiers. Hardcore. Well, it was a great... Anytime I go to a party and I know the music the band is playing, that's a good sign. So I really enjoyed last night. And it was great to get to know a lot of people and hear some great stories. So the whole idea of the last mile of the translation process and where the value lies, where we can continue adding value, that's the key. If we can't continue adding value for our customers, why should they bother, right? They'll just leapfrog us and just start using AI directly, right? That's the fear, at least. So here's just a quick agenda. What do I mean by the last mile? And most of the talk will be about the whole idea of addressing value in the process, and then I'll leave some time for questions. Emmy already gave a quick intro, but just where I stand in regard to technology. I had a small boutique LSP. I don't know if I just like shiny new things, but I was always pretty quick to adopt new tools. That was just maybe curiosity, maybe a form of greed, I don't know. But I always jumped on with new technology. And we had our own homegrown system that we developed starting around 2000. And then one day I just realized this is nuts. It had to be around 2010 or so. I said, this is crazy. Why am I spending so much money having staff to maintain this thing that we struggle to maintain? I said, are we a software company or are we a translation company? And back then I decided we were a translation company, and that's when I got Plunet, and it was the smartest thing I ever did for my company, and it worked out great. And it still continues to, it's a great return on investment for me. I'm building a whole career around it still as a consultant, so it's great. So currently I consult and I work primarily with small to mid-sized LSPs, and that's really where I'm coming from today. Speaking with so many of you here over the last day or so, I was reminded how diverse we really are. I mean, the future is not evenly distributed, as we say, right? So we all stand at different points of this development curve in regard to AI. I really appreciated Frederick's presentation yesterday. It supported some of the things you'll hear today, which made me very happy because it proved to me I was on the right track and I wasn't crazy when I was putting this together. Okay, so it came to me, when I was asked to present that, where can we really add value in the translation process was in the last and final stages of the translation process. So it reminded me of this whole time in the late 1990s, early 2000s in the telecom industry where this became a big driving concept. A real problem in the telecom industry was the last mile problem. It became known as the last mile problem. The large telecoms had wired the globe, bandwidth got cheaper and cheaper, but they were still struggling with that final connection into people's businesses and homes. And it's the most challenging step, that's why. It's where you're getting closest to the customer, where local requirements, what streets can you dig up, what buildings can you access, all the very granular amounts of information that you need to provide the service start to come to play. So, but the more I thought about this, I'm like, yeah, but in our industry, it's different. We provide value in so many different places. And so I changed from this picture, which is an AI-generated photo of the last mile of country road that you might wire up as a telecom. And I came up with that picture, generated on Sora, of someone running an ultra marathon. So how's that for a metaphor for our business? You know, every project you take is this ultra marathon that you have to grind through, right? No, that's not necessarily the case, and we don't want it to be like that. And I will admit that for me with AI, that was the first time I used it for image generation, and it was really fun and cool. I created a whole series of these pictures that you'll see through different phases of the race. Okay, so here's our runner in the first mile, all happy. And the first mile of any race, for anybody who's competed in competitive endurance sports, the first mile really is the most important mile, because that's where you make all your decisions that either make or break your race. You know, if you start out too fast, you're going to die midway. If you start out too slow, you're giving up ground to the competition. So the first mile is really important. And in our industry, the first mile is where the first mile of the project, the early phases of a project, is where some of the most important things happen. Like, how are we going to access the content? You know, that's constantly the first question. It's like, where's your stuff? And how are we going to get it? How do we get to it, right? And then capturing requirements. That was talking to someone from one of the partner companies here mentioned to me that the big challenge with implementing their technology is that LSPs don't understand the systems they're being asked to access. And to me, that means you're not taking requirements seriously. You're not learning enough. You need to learn about your customers' systems and the technical requirements that are necessary to gain access. And then, of course, what process is going to work? You know, how are all the pieces going to come together? That has to be defined as well, because the client's requirements might drive that process. So I'm going to sandwich the process, talking about the first mile and the last mile. In the last mile, I can simply say, and this is hyperbole and oversimplification. The last mile is just delivering the content. And what I mean by that is it's not just packaging and sending it. Well, it's the packaging for sure. It's not just a sending process. That's important too, of course. But all the value that we add to the translation in the final steps, you've been doing it for years already, right? But now it's more important than ever. AI is not solving this problem perfectly. It's making it easier for sure. But the value-added service that we've traditionally provided in the forms of any kind, I just generally refer to as integration. It could be desktop publishing, it could be localization engineering, graphic design. All those things we do have actually become more valuable, in my opinion. The customers still can't handle it, and AI doesn't do it perfectly. It's made it easier in some ways, but it's still not perfect. Humans are still necessary for it. And so the point is, humans are really needed and are critical at both ends of this process still. I say for now. It's a bit of a warning, but if you're not going to start deriving value now, when are you going to do it, right? If you can't prove yourselves now, it's not going to get any easier. So adding value always is the key. All right. So value in the first mile and in the last mile. There are really no excuses now to have a fully streamlined process. You have Plunet. We've heard a lot of great ways that it can be connected. We have a lot of partners that help us connect it to other systems. There are a few excuses now. Yeah, you can complain about cost, but there's also huge value in having these connections, and it's harder to justify not doing it, not partnering, and not having all the tools you need. You can't really leave it up to the customer anymore, because like I said, the customer will just try to figure out on their own, and for us, that is a disaster. That's an absolute disaster. So Making sure you're connecting, not having integrated systems internally is also, I think, zero excuse for it. To have your BMS and your TMS siloed and having to repeat. I've heard some situations where, technology from certain providers is behind and you're stuck duplicating work, but that kind of stuff breaks my heart. In this day and age, there's just no need for it. And one thing I really want to emphasize is prioritizing off the shelf. This is the golden age of off the shelf. We have wonderful partners here who have already done all the hard work, right? I hear this a lot in the US from various companies. Oh, we're just going to build that ourselves. And I'm like, why? Why when you could quickly and easily solve the problem by just spending the time, finding the right partner, having good detailed technical conversations with them, and coming to a good agreement about accessing their software. It just makes, to me, I don't know, it just makes zero sense. It's not like back in 2000 when there wasn't a Plunet or other competitor products or business management. We didn't have a lot of choice back then. We built our own systems. And many of us still do, but it's becoming harder and harder to justify, in my belief. Again, what are you? Are you a software company or are you a service company? So prioritize off the shelf. With a lot of these tools, you're getting so much built-in automation already, things you won't have to worry about developing, and the connections are turnkey. If you do have to do custom, just make sure the business case is there. Have the data, and definitely, if you're driven to it, make sure the customer is on board to help drive it. That's all I can say. The other reason why you want to go off the shelf is there's huge value placed on expediency. There's a lot less patience. Again, the bar has been raised on everything. AI is making things so easy. People just assume it's easy, right? They're going to assume it's easy. And as always, we're going to be behind the curtain, dancing as fast as we can to make it happen for them. That's what we do as a service industry. And that's great. But the truth is that those expectations haven't changed. It's getting harder and harder. So you don't have a long time to develop complex solutions. You really don't. You have to be able to ramp up very quickly. And you definitely don't have the luxury of designing a 6-figure solution for a 5-figure problem. No one wants to pay for it. It probably won't. You'll have that solution available for 1 or 2 iterations, and it'll become worthless because something will change, and you're going to have to be able to adapt quickly. And again, with the off-the-shelf partners, they're constantly doing this. They're constantly coming up with new connections, new ways to solve problems and improve workflows. And you're never going to be able to keep up with that. So relying on the existing solutions also is better for business. I believe you have better cost amortization because a lot of the services are contingent on a pay-as-you-go model. There might be some, onboarding fees and things, but it makes a lot more sense economically instead of absorbing big development costs up front. Again, shorter lead times. And you're also relying on someone who has a track record, a solution that has already maybe been used elsewhere that you can show. You don't have to take the time to do proof of concept because someone else has already done it. So to me, that's a big benefit. And then you're getting a lot of free consulting, which you can see it here when you talk to any of these providers. Consulting just comes with the service, and that's a huge value to us. And it makes it far easier to sell this whole solution that you're putting together for your clients a lot easier to sell to them as well. But back to what I was saying before about requirements. There's a tendency in translation to just start translating. That's always been the case. Rushing to translate is I think one of the biggest sins in the industry. And there's less of a reason now. Think about it. since the rise of, let's say, neural MT, you've gained back nearly 70% of your production timeline because humans aren't spending all the time translating it. It used to be 100,000 words, yeah, 5 days. That's the fastest we can do with 5 translators. You know, what does DeepL take to do 100,000 words? You know, you could probably do it in 10, 15 minutes. So what are you going to do with all this extra time? Well, I think the best thing, and this is somewhat counterintuitive, but slow down a little bit. Slow down. Make sure you really have all the requirements from your customer. It's more important than ever to get the style guides and the glossaries. You know, things we've been doing for a long time have become more important than ever. You know, understanding the style points, which become prompts now for your editing LLM, is super critical. And there's really no reason why we can't slow down and gather this information. And of course, use AI to create this stuff. You know, it's amazing how well ChatGPT can compile a list of term candidates for you and provide translations for a quick and easy pass. But also the bar being raised, you know, everyone still has doubts. Everyone wants to run and jump in with the newest, greatest thing, but they also want reassurance that it's actually going to work, right? Hallucinations still are a thing. It's already out in the public consciousness that, you know, LLMs can hallucinate. So can we really trust this stuff? So the solution still has to be really durable, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you're controlling for risk. You know, ChatGPT is not going to do that for you. You have to show what steps you're taking. And the humans in the loop are still the greatest risk mitigating process that we have. Again, just confirming that deployed technology will support all the requirements, not just the ones that seem apparent, but it's going to be really robust, really detailed, and work across the board. And I have one anecdote that I picked up at a local lunch in my area a few months ago. I had a young localization project manager who's so, you know, just so eager to tell us about a project that she had managed. It was a voiceover project, and they jumped right into, you know, AI dubbing. And it turned into a nightmare. It turned into a nightmare. They didn't know that they, you know, trying to do what we would call in the old days callbacks, you know, re-recording. The dubbing just wasn't getting the tone right. And the client wasn't satisfied. And trying to go back and do this iteratively in 25 languages was really hard, you know. Because, yeah, the solution was there, but they leapt before they looked. And they didn't know what the limitations of technology were. And most important of all is really making sure you're not building a black box, right? You know, it's very easy to fall into this this trap of just designing a solution and then doing what we always do as an industry, kind of just drifting back into the shadows. You know, we're the translators who don't want to be seen. And because we love to make it easy, and we want to make everything, you know, very transparent for the customer. But in that, I think it's a terrible way to do business because you don't hide the value. You have to expose the value of what you're doing, why you're doing it at all steps of the process. And of course, to future-proof yourself, the best thing you can do is look in industries where the human in the loop is still very much a requirement. That goes without saying. Okay, so other services that you can do in those initial miles that if you're not, you know, a lot of these things you already do and we've done traditionally, but now they're even more important. But some other things as well that we don't normally do. I think Frederick mentioned yesterday they have, you know, 10 data specialists working, you know, job titles that we didn't even have a year ago, right? But doing cultural assessment, you know, we still have to address the junk in, junk out problem and deal with issues of bias in in translation, especially through LLMs. So doing cultural assessment of your client's content could be really useful, and it provides big value to them. You know, is there content written in a culturally appropriate way that the automation can easily deal with and not misinterpret? Benchmarking solutions, making sure they understand. Again, clients have the same information we have, and they're gonna ask, well, why aren't you using this solution? Why are you using that solution? Well, you have to be able to educate them and tell them why a certain solution is better, and actually show them the data. So doing assessment of, you know, neural versus LLM or hybrid models and things like that is super important. And there are again, that's another area where you can go off the shelf. There are providers who will do this for you. Of course, process assessment and design. You know, a lot of clients take this wasn't it just included? Well, not really. It doesn't have to be, right? You're providing huge value to them because you're selling and working with them consultatively. As I mentioned before, terminology extraction and development, more critical than ever. Terminology management is the flossing of the language industry. We all know we should do it. Everyone says they do it. No one really does it. Let's just be honest, right? So, and we know now you need these term lists because now you can really check against them. Now there's useful data that the models can use. I can't claim that that label of language architect as my own. I forget where I read it, so I apologize. I can't give it proper attribution. But you know, the role, I don't think Frederick calls him this, but the role of language architect is really important. You know, PMs traditionally are the ones saddled with maintaining TMs and things like that. Again, another part of the process. 5 minutes already? No way. Okay, I'm going to start running faster than this guy. Of course, model training, and then going as far as getting involved with managing the content pipeline. So the point of the first mile is that, as I mentioned before, when running an endurance race, the first mile is the most critical. In our context, the first mile is obviously the foundation for everything that comes next. And for me, what comes next is the most black box part of the process, the translation cycle itself, okay, is where you've laid all of the proper foundation. It should really be the most effective and easiest part of the process for you, and you should know what you're getting. You shouldn't be guessing what's going to come out at the other end, okay? So the middle miles of production, the big thing is reliability. I think Stefan mentioned that yesterday. Being reliable is super important. I think that's more important than ever. And I like to say, and I always say this to my project managers, we're not playing jazz here. This should be a symphony, and you're the conductor, right? This should be well planned. We're not riffing on this, guys. We're not making up as we go. There's very little tolerance for that now today. And definitely make sure you're leaning on the AI to do all of your research and all of the preparation you need to do to make it all faster. Lastly, for the last mile, okay, where my metaphor began, I still believe this is where we provide, still the greatest room for value is in the closing phases of a project. I say human in the loop is great, but expert in the loop is better. I think we're going to see a huge crunch on talent in the industry because we're going to need to really rely on true SMEs, true experts in the content we're working on, because their role is going to become much more tied to accuracy of meaning and technical accuracy above all, and only true experts can do this. So that puts huge pressure on vendor management, who are already struggling just to get people who can do traditional post-editing, right? It's getting people post edit, we're still dragging them kicking and screaming. And if you are, don't. Just stop. If they're not willing to do the work, move on. That would be my instruction to your vendor managers. I have zero tolerance for people who don't want to provide my company's service. You know, I'm not gonna negotiate with you over what the defined job is. That's crazy. Instead, embrace those who are eager to learn. Treat them like gold, cherish them, and make them help make them experts. They may not be expert in the tool set and in the process, but they might know the subject matter area. Those are the people you want to invest in. And lastly, this whole issue around ethical AI curation, I think we stand in a really pivotal place. We're the ones looking at the content, at least most of it, maybe only 3% of it, right? But we should still be the ones who can point the way to issues with how the content's being generated, if there are biases. So, just to beat a dead horse, value to the last inch. You like my localization pun? Value to the last inch. And here we have our guy at the finish, and it turns out he's been running against robots the whole time. When I first got this topic, it sounded a little bit to me like, oh wow, am I expected to be doing a lot of predictions here? Because I'm not in a prediction game for sure. But I'm willing to kind of place my bets on a few things. Account management capability is going to be hugely needed. You've got to get so much closer to your customers now, closer than ever. So you can be frontline in all those necessary requirements that you have to track very closely. You're going to need super focused, super PMs who not only understand the tool set, but are also able to leverage the tools well, who are smart with the technology they use. And they have to have SME knowledge, meaning subject matter knowledge of the fields they're supporting for their clients, the verticals they're working in, as well as the clients themselves. It would drive me nuts when I would ask a PM, hey, what's that project about? Who's that client? And they would say, oh, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? How can you not know what our clients do? I find that unacceptable. Again, you're going to need the language data architects. And a funny thing about that bullet, when I was working on my presentation, I ran it through ChatGPT to tighten it up and make bullets more concise. And it spit that one back as data language architect. And I read that, I'm like, data language architect. Only a bot would come up with that. So, again, super vendor managers. And you will need someone who can do this kind of system integration. It might be someone just designing flowcharts, but they have to understand the systems that they're trying to connect, at least at the conceptual level. So, closing predictions. Small, medium-sized LSPs, in my opinion, are not going anywhere. People are still going to want to turn to an expert because they really don't know. They really don't know, right? And that's the whole point. Own the tool. If you own the tool set instead of being owned by it, and don't allow the clients to leapfrog us in terms of choosing which tools are the right tools, you'll be providing critical support that customers want and expect. They're as uncertain as the rest of us, and they want someone to point the way. And I think that's where small, medium-sized LSPs provide a big service still. One thing I'm definitely hearing is that change-averse owners are exiting faster, so it's a great time to be acquiring because a lot of people are afraid of what's coming next, and they just don't want to keep up with the change. And of course, this is a great line. I wish I could, again, I can't remember who said it. Ishvan, it might have been you. AI will not eat your lunch, but the competitors using AI will, and I definitely believe that. And if you're not doing interpreting, consider adding it to your product line. In case you're not getting the closing reference here, I included my prompt that I gave Sora. That's the theme of the Obama Hope campaign poster. So that's my hopeful view for AI. And another thing that should give you hope is this closing image. How many of you heard about the half marathon in China that was run by bots? Had anybody heard about that? They're run by robots? They really publicized this. They were going to have a half marathon where a large number of robots would be running. But pay attention to that scene. Look at the guy behind the robot. That is the ultimate human in the loop. That's where we are, people. Don't give up hope. That's it. So, any questions? Because I know I went over. So, any questions, challenges, predictions? Anybody want to offer more predictions than I was willing to do? Okay, well, thanks for your time and attention.